What's up, gang? Welcome back to NV Ranger & Co. Hope you're all doing well. Today, Mr. House is sending us back out to the Boston Commonwealth, but this time we're going to take a look at the subways and the monorail system. Mr. House is considering construction for a subway system in New Vegas. It's one of the only modern Fallout titles without one. On the other hand, Boston not only has one of the oldest subway systems in the United States, but also one of the most historically dangerous, so perhaps he's looking at what not to do as we inspect this system. Briefly, take a moment to think back on Fallout 3's subway system if you've played that game. While it was creepy and had atmosphere, it quickly became a pretty frustrating thing to have to navigate over and over again, because unless you were going to fast travel, it was the only way to get around the DC ruins. My assumption as to why Bethesda did this isn't because they hate us. I think it's more because there were technical limitations when creating that dense urban sprawl of downtown Washington, D.C. We can see this given that certain sections of the city were actually cut off, and we got a pretty limited portion of the D.C. area. We can see this when we look at the map of Fallout 3 and see how the city is actually fixed right in the corner of the map, and then when we go to this area and look off beyond Rivet City and other sections, we can see other large buildings in the distance across the Potomac River that we can't reach. This is very different from how New Vegas and Fallout 4 structure their maps, where we have New Vegas placed on the northern half but still roughly in the middle of the map, and then Fallout 4's Boston is very much in the center of the map, where you can walk around the entire perimeter of these cities and access every bit of them. Fallout 3 and Fallout 4 use their subways very differently, almost surprisingly so. Fallout 3 again uses them as a means to an end. They're a way of traveling throughout that urban section of the map. In Fallout 3, the subways are primarily travel routes, and then their secondary use case is as dungeons with enemies, loot, quests, things like that. Now, that doesn't sound like a crazy claim. Of course, subways in the pre-war and in real life are for traveling. I make this distinction because Fallout 4's subway system doesn't function like this at all. It is not used for traveling. You cannot go from one subway station to another. For whatever reason, Bethesda in Fallout 4 decided to gut the subway systems and entirely streamline them to being little more than dungeons. Think about it like this. If you boot up Fallout 4 right now, go find a subway station, clear it out, find the enemies, loot it, do whatever you want, and play through it, and then come out the other side, which would just be the same entrance that you went in, and then go play Skyrim, go to a cave, a bandit hideout, even a Dwemer ruin, you will have a very, very similar experience. The reality is we don't even have to go as far as Skyrim or another game. Just within Fallout 4 itself, the subway stations are treated very similarly to other quote-unquote dungeon-like locations. Now, using Fallout 3's subway station to travel amongst the DC ruins was pretty frustrating as time went on. I'm not saying that that's really what I wanted out of Fallout 4's subway system, but the fact that you don't need to use it to travel throughout the map, but you also can't use it to travel throughout the map, I think is a problem. The thing is, this system is relatively accurate to real life in terms of lining up the stations and putting them where they should be to their real life counterparts, and then they also have the tiles correctly associating the colors of each line. So if you're on the green line of the subway, you'll go into that subway in Fallout 4 and notice that it has green tiles and you're on the green line, and it lines up with the other subway stations that should be on that line. So it's structured in a way that's based on real life. It's structured in a way where you could just walk through the tunnels from one station to another, but they decided to just not do the tunnels, which is pretty frustrating because why include the subway station then? I mean, of course, I'd rather have it there than not, but it's not any different from another dungeon throughout the map. And I might be nitpicking here, but this is attention to detail that would be appreciated if it was considered, but it wasn't. So why was Fallout 3's DC nuked seemingly harder than Fallout 4's Boston, but the metro is still navigable? I mean, think about it. The reason we have to use the metro system in Fallout 3 is because the city is so destroyed that you can't casually walk throughout it. Whereas Boston, you can walk throughout the city without using the metro system, but every single metro tunnel is destroyed despite seemingly not being hit as hard. It doesn't really make sense. I'm curious what you guys think as to why the subway in Fallout 4 isn't navigable. I feel like Bethesda missed a really good opportunity here given the value of loot in their gameplay loop, because Fallout 4 is based around crafting and the settlement system and things like that. They could have put really valuable high-level loot down in the metros and made them a really dangerous place to explore, kind of similar to the Glowing Sea but a bit different, and perhaps also maybe you're not able to save down in the metros, so it's kind of like an extraction shooter type experience. Go down into the metros, it's very dark, maybe you have limited light, and then you have to go in, explore. If you die, and you don't get to keep anything you got in there, and then you also have to try and escape. I feel like that would have been a really cool addition to Fallout 4's gameplay that they missed out on, and just made these things very simple and often forgettable dungeons. Another interesting detail about our subway system here is the trains and their passenger cars are actually suspended from a monorail that runs along the ceiling. They do still have railroad tracks beneath them though. Initially, I thought this was some sort of strange oversight on Bethesda's part, but then when I entered the Park Street station outside of Vault 114, we can see that these railroad tracks are still being used. The real-life Boston subway doesn't run on a monorail line like this, so I'm not exactly sure why they made this change. When we look at the commuter monorail system in Fallout 4, this is a monorail line that runs under the overpass highways. We'll get into this a bit later. It uses the same exact model, the same sort of rail line, so maybe they just reused those assets. It's also kind of interesting that the real-life commuter rail line also doesn't run on a monorail. I'm not sure if this is true, this is just my theory, but it seems like they created this above-ground monorail system and then implemented those same assets down into the subway system, because I'm not exactly sure why you'd have this traditional railroad running down below and then put a monorail line up above it. Maybe someone who knows a bit more about trains and subway systems can go into further detail as to why they would do this or if this even makes sense. And going back to comparing the game design between Fallout 3 and 4, I made a video taking a look at the monorail system that runs across the Capital Wasteland. The trains here connect from the bottom to the tracks beneath them, but in Fallout 4 we can see the monorail is connected at the top, so it connects at the top of the trains and then the tracks run above them. I think it's interesting how each game has this unique design for its monorail systems. We can also see that the Capital Wasteland rail is separate from the highways. It often runs next to the highways but not under it, whereas Fallout 4's runs under the overpass highways and doesn't disconnect from it or run on any unique tracks as far as we can see. And Fallout 3's monorail is under the fictional agency of CMR, whereas Fallout 4's transportation generally seems to all be under the Massachusetts Bay Transportation Authority, which is based on the real-life government agency. So now what we're going to do is take a look at every single subway station in the game, whether you can enter them or not, and also take a look at the commuter rail line that runs under the overpass highways and map them out so we can get an idea as to where we might have been able to travel and how we might have been able to use these subway systems and rail lines to get around the map had Bethesda decided to fully flesh them out. By the end, we'll have a complete subway map that connects all the stations together, and this shouldn't be too difficult because Bethesda already did a lot of the legwork. Not only are these stations based on real-life stations, but they're also color coordinated. In Fallout 4, each subway line has 3 different stations tied to it. So we'll start here with the green subway line, which will bring us to Fenn's Way subway station based on the real-life Fenway subway station that would take you close to Fenway Park, which is a baseball field in Boston. I'm sure you'll recognize this is the ballpark where Diamond City is located in-game. The Fenway station, for whatever reason, is not a marked location on the map, but it is near Hangman's Alley. You can find it pretty easily just beyond that location. Another strange little detail, the doors are not centered, which is kind of bothersome to me. I don't know why the doors aren't centered on this subway station, but they're not. They're just slightly adjusted to our left if we're looking at the door. This station is also incredibly caved in. Much of the tunnels are caved in as we'll look at these subway stations, but the actual station that you walk into is also very caved in, so there's not a whole lot to see here. And I also tried to use the TCL console command, which allows you to toggle clipping and walk through in-game objects and surfaces to see if there was anything that remained of the tunnels, and we can see a little bit of a stretch where we do have some tunnel, but then it quickly turns into this strange multicolored, disorienting void. We can also see that the train cars have driver seats, so it was unlikely that these were automated trains, and this is much like the real-life situation where you have actual drivers operating the trains. It also seems that this train station was subject to some Creation Club content. Now, I don't have access to this, I guess, because I'm playing on a rolled-back version of Fallout 4, but I guess Wally Mack and a shoot-off of the tunnel snakes from Fallout 3 came to this station to intentionally expose themselves to radiation in an effort to get superpowers. And of course, this didn't work out, they just turned into feral ghouls. I know this is Creation Club content, but this sounds like Bethesda quality storytelling at its best. The next station on the Green Line is the Copley Station, and this is another unmarked location, but technically you can fast travel here because it's connected to the Boston Public Library. This entrance and positioning very closely mimics the real-life Copley Station, but unfortunately in-game this serves as little more than an extension to the Boston Public Library Greater Dungeon. There's actually one of the more traditional subway entrances for the Copley Station just south of the Boston Library, but it's completely caved in, so you can't use it as an entrance. Our last location that will finish off the Green Line is the Park Street Station in the Boston Common. This location is particularly unique because it was purchased by the Vault-Tec Corporation so that they could put Vault 114 inside of it. It's noted that this station was shut down on February 11th by Vault-Tec so they could begin their construction, and this would essentially make it easier because they would already have an underground area to work with. We know that it was shut down in February of 2077, and we know the bombs dropped in October, so this means for many months of the last year of the pre-war, this station wasn't available for use. The Park Street Station is an intersection between the Red Line and the Green Line, and we can see this represented in-game on the station's exterior. So if we're strictly using the color-coordinated tiles on the interior of these subway stations, this is technically the last subway station on the Green Line, but we do have the Valente Station. Now this one is sort of an odd one. The Valente Station is one of the few that isn't based on a real-life station, at least in its name, but when it comes to location, it sits on the north end, and we can assume this is probably based on the North Station. The Valente Station actually draws its name from the Fallout 4 world artist John Valente, and perhaps this is him at work here. We can see that this station has a pretty unique exterior, looking almost Art Deco inspired, or maybe like an old school theater. The wiki does credit John with having worked on this station, and it seems there's something more sinister going on here. When you enter the station, it's quite limited. You can't move around like you can with many of the other stations. You're just stuck in the lobby, and you'll see 3 different skeletons sat around watching a cage fight of sorts. It's a very small cage, and it contains 4 skeletons in total. 2 of them are clean, and the other 2 are still covered in blood for some reason. The combatants had access to a series of weapons, including 1 boxing glove, a pool cue, and a chair. And as often goes hand in hand with watching some fights, you can see that the spectators were participating in gambling given the amount of pre-war money laying around them. We also have this teddy bear cuddled up next to the middle skeleton. Maybe he has something to do with this. Some of you might think that this was just a mistake given the station isn't colored correctly with the tiles based on where it sits on the line, and then you have the signs on the outside indicating that it should be a part of the Green Line. I don't think that's the case though. I think this was done deliberately. The exterior is very unique. The naming of this station is unique. And then when we go on the inside, we have this interesting and strange set piece that has the skeletons colored differently in a deliberate way as well, almost like there are 2 teams, like shirts versus skins or something like that. Let me know if you have any insight or ideas as to what's going on in the Valente Station. The only thing I can think of is something WWE related, although I don't know much about that at all. I'm just thinking that given there's a steel cage with a chair as a weapon inside. And before we move on to the Red Line, I just want to note that the Valente is another unmarked subway station, so out of the 4 that we've looked at, we've only had 1 in the Park Street Station that is actually marked and titled on the map. And let's also briefly look at the Green Line and where it goes in real life, because we can see we get quite a limited section of the Green Line in game. This should extend well above the Charles River all the way to the Medford/Tufts station. We do have the Medford Hospital in game, but the Bethesda devs decided to move this location and the Malden Center sort of right next to each other in this one small town of sorts. They kind of combined them so they didn't have to make two separate towns north of the downtown Boston area. The Malden Center is actually a part of the Orange Line, but we'll get to that later. And then when we look at the south end of the Green Line, we can see it has 4 branching lines on it that go to Boston College, Cleveland Circle, Riverside, and Heath Street. But we don't see any of this. It essentially ends at the Fensway Station, which is based again on the Fenway Station. If we go to the northwest of Cambridge, we'll find another station in the College Square Station. This is based off the Harvard Station, which should be in Harvard Square. Now this station technically isn't marked, but the College Square area is marked, and then once you go in and wander towards the center, you'll pretty easily find this station. I didn't realize this whole time that College Square was based on Harvard Square and that Harvard was sitting right here. I wasn't familiar with the fact that the school was so close to MIT, or what would be CIT in Fallout 4. The next station on the red line would be the Park Street Station, which intersects with the Green Line as we've already discussed, and then it will take us all the way down to the Andrew Station. This station is based on the real-life Andrew Station, and it's placed in the correct area, so everything checks out there. The exterior to the Andrew Station is pretty unique, where most of the stations are getting a small rectangular concrete box around them. This one has a large building built around it. This trend continues with the interior, which is also quite expansive, and you'll notice an unsettling amount of mannequins spread throughout this station. The station itself is quite large, but it also continues on through a series of maintenance tunnels that will take us to a boxing ring, so we have more fights going on down here in the subways. Those tunnels will eventually lead you to a sealed door only accessible via a keypad code where Eddie Winter, the pre-war criminal, is hiding out. Eventually you'll end up in the basement of Joe's Spucky's, where some sort of comedy routine was taking place and the comedian was pelted with potatoes to death. It's a confusing set piece because you have a skeleton that seems to be likely from the pre-war, so over 200 years old, but then they are pelted with a tato, which is a post-war food item, and you can still see the fresh red paste all around them. The red line should go a bit further north than Harvard, all the way up to Alewife, and then it should go further south than the Andrew Station and actually split in 2 different directions. One of those directions should run through Quincy and go all the way to Braintree, but we can see in game that there isn't a subway station in Quincy. We do have the commuter rail line running here though. Now we'll begin the orange line of the subway, starting with the West Roxbury Station. Now this whole area, including the interior of the subway, is infested with super mutants. The interesting thing about the West Roxbury Station is that it actually has some functioning trains inside of it. We even have one of the companions, Curie, saying, "Oh, a choo-choo train. Maybe one day the tracks will be clear and we can take a trip." In reality, this just functions as some sort of puzzle within another dungeon-like subway station, but it would have been awesome if at some point we could clear out the subway tunnels in an effort to rebuild the Commonwealth under the Minutemen and have them all interconnected, and use this as some sort of fast travel system that wouldn't just be opening up your map, clicking on a location, and magically teleporting there. The next stop on the orange line will take us deeper into the downtown Boston area, where we will run into the Medical Center metro station. This station has one of the more unassuming entrances where you just have a doorway on the side of a large building. Once on the interior, you'll notice a series of these ominous and looming statues that Bethesda likes to include in their Fallout titles. You'll also see that one of the subway tunnels appears to be flooded. This station also has a caved-in ceiling that leads up to the basement of the DB Technical High School. And we can see at this point a few of the subway stations don't connect to one another, but they do connect to other locations in odd and unnatural ways. The final location we have for the orange line is the Malden Center. Now this is one of the more captivating and interesting stations when you first come upon it, because there's an ongoing battle between Institute synths and the raiders that inhabit this station. You have a decent sized area to explore within the station, but upon taking an elevator to go to a lower level, this will reveal another rail line. Now this isn't the same subway monorail that runs along the ceiling. This line uses those traditional railroad tracks that run beneath the trains. There are also a couple of New Hampshire and Massachusetts labeled rail cars down here, so apparently there's some sort of lower level underground system going on beneath the subways that we don't get to see in the other subway stations. I'm not sure why this is exclusive to this one, but here we are. So that completes our green line, red line, and orange line, which will take us to the blue line, and we'll start that off at Scully Square, which is the third rail in Good Neighbor. The Scully Square station, being repurposed as a jazz club within one of the major settlements of the game, is the first and only instance where one of these subway stations that is accessible isn't used as a dungeon full of hostile enemies. Given its approximate location, the Scully Station, or third rail here, should be based on the real-life State Station. The blue line remains unique, with its next station also not being used as a dungeon. The unfortunate side is that it's not used at all. Right in the middle of Postal Square, we have the post office station, where we can see it's completely caved in. They're the beginning of some escalators, but we can't enter down into this station. This is a pretty strange location because if we look on the map, we can't see anything titled the Post Office Station or the Postal Station. There's no subway station with this name, but based on its area and location, we can see it might be based on the Aquarium subway station. And just across the water from the Postal Station, we have the airport, and there should be a subway station underground here at the airport, but given that the airport is destroyed and fallen apart and also largely inaccessible, perhaps we can assume there's a subway station down there, but we just can't get to it, of course. And then finally, the last stop on the blue line we have in game will take us to the Revere Beach Station. This is based on the real-life station of the same name and has a uniquely raised entrance. Unfortunately, this station is little more than another glorified raider dungeon. You can go a bit further down into the tunnels here, but eventually they end like all of the rest do, just in debris and clutter. That completes our subway station mapping, so we can see we have the completed green line, red line, orange line, and blue line, but that doesn't finish everything because, as I've mentioned throughout the video, we have a commuter monorail that runs under the highway systems in the Commonwealth area. This commuter monorail appears to be based on the real-life commuter rail line, which is represented by purple on the map here. And just like that map, we'll also use squares instead of circles to represent the stations for this monorail, but the thing is, there are only 2 stations in the entire map, despite it going across all of the map. We can see one of those stations does stop in Quincy. Like we talked about earlier, the red line should have come all the way down here, but it doesn't. Yet we do have the commuter rail line having a stop point here. And then I did follow this overpass well beyond the playable space south of Quincy, and I did see that this monorail does continue on like it should in real life. If we turn around and go north of Quincy, we have the only other stop point for this commuter rail at the Massachusetts Bay Medical Center. We can see these stations are represented by these red cylindrical tubes, and again, there's only 2 of these in the entire game. We do have a crashed train here at the Mass Bay Medical Center that falls all the way down on top of the roof of Hester's Consumer Robotics. I really like how Bethesda used the trains in some instances to add to the verticality of Fallout 4. And after this, you'll begin to see what I mean by this rail line feeling very incomplete. Not only will this pass through sections that seems infeasible for the train cars that are attached to it to have been able to pass through without running into buildings, but it will also go all the way up to Lexington, where it will just end. And it's not that there isn't some sort of station or stop point in Lexington like you think there would be, but it also just doesn't make sense for the rail line to come up here because you can see these road support structures would have blocked any train from coming through. And then when we look at this intersection here, we can see we have a roadway that runs roughly west and east, and then another one that runs north and south. I know you have this section over here that we just followed where we went south to north, but you can see for the sake of discussion why this is the east to west roadway, and then we have the north to south. Now this north and south roadway does have its own monorail line on it, and it doesn't seem like they connect anywhere, but it also appears that this north to south monorail would have been hitting the cars beneath it. Perhaps this was something that was added in late stage development and they ran out of time to figure everything out, because you can see it definitely would have run into certain buildings and things and caused massive accidents. There's no way this thing was functioning back and forth. And when we look at the north and south rail line out of Lexington, when we go north, we can see that it does continue beyond the borders of the map, but then when we go south down through the Mass Pike interchange and towards the glowing sea, it runs to the edge of the map, but then it doesn't continue through the glowing sea. We can see more of those road support structures would be blocking it, and there's no rail lines under the highway overpass. If we take a look at the roadway that runs east and west through the Mass Pike interchange, they both lead to tunnels, so it makes sense that there's no monorail line here. And then when we go up back to Lexington, and if we're to push west off of that roadway, there's no monorail line here either. This eventually takes you out to Nuka World and the Nuka World station. And just to complete the job, I'll also highlight the railroad that runs through the map. Somebody mentioned in the comments of one of my videos that the Fallout 4 railroad was functional just before the events of the game, kind of similar to how New Vegas's was, but I can't find any evidence supporting this, none whatsoever. So if you know more about this, feel free to comment below. I would go into further detail about this railroad, but there's really not much interesting about it, much like the faction in game. It runs through a couple stations like the Bedford Station and Oberlin Station, and then it splits towards the center of the map just south of the downtown area, where it eventually runs into a crater, and then it also continues south through that swampy region next to this road over here where our commuter rail line does, but I don't know, there's just not a lot to talk about there. The primary company operating on these railroads appears to be that same company we saw under the Malden Center, being NH&M, standing for New Hampshire and Massachusetts. They have these enormous towering locomotives pulling the rail cars behind them, but beyond that, I don't think this does much for the world building. Unfortunately, the subway system and surrounding elements seem to have fallen victim to the larger issues of Fallout 4 in its streamlining, where we add verticality, we remove subway travel. We add crafting and settlement building, we remove player freedom in role-playing. We add a voiced player character, we remove a substantive dialogue system. We add power armor as a wearable exosuit, but we remove its scarcity and value. We add radiant quests for endless content, but we really dumb down the side quests and their depth. We add legendary enemies with unique loot, but that unique loot looks just like any other item of the same variety. We add a streamlined perk system, which removes skills and deeper character customization. The list goes on, and unfortunately, the subway is just another example of this streamlining. In Fallout 3, what we had was an expansive system, and that sure was frustrating to get around, but instead of trying to improve upon how the subway system functions or was used in game, they just removed it altogether and reduced these locations to little more than dungeons. Here's our complete map for the Commonwealth here. I have to get this back to Mr. House so we can potentially get to work on a New Vegas subway system. If you enjoyed the report, like and subscribe. It helps keep the lights on over here at NV Ranger and Coconut, and I'll see you guys in the comments.